Episode 458, Breaking News. Everyone was stunned. They couldn't believe what Nellie had said. As much as they cared for Alex, they knew that Lincoln would never allow him back into the family after all that had happened. It was unthinkable. Flora and Gideon squirmed at the mention of their son's name. They shifted nervously in their chairs and studied Lincoln's face with apprehension. Lincoln was conflicted. He knew that Alex loved and cared for his family, and he wanted nothing more than to return that love. But he was a proud man, and he lived according to principles. Alex had made his choice, and that choice had consequences. Nothing could change that. Alex, he murmured faintly, and memories of his grandson flowed through his mind. A sad look fell over his face, and his eyes grew watery. He turned to Nellie and looked into her eyes. "You don't understand, Nellie. What you suggest is impossible." Flora started crying. Gideon gently stroked his wife's shoulder in an effort to comfort her, but he was close to tears himself. Justin sighed audibly and rubbed his hands feverishly. He didn't know what to do with himself. Lincoln watched them as he considered his options. In one sense, Nellie was right. He had heard of Alex's recent exploits, and he would be a great help. But if his disobedience to the family was forgiven, Lincoln's authority would be undermined. Bringing Alex back would be good for the family in the short term, but it would open the door to future discord and strife. Besides, Alex would be unlikely to turn the tide on his own. Lincoln didn't say anything more. He had made his decision, but it hurt him deeply. He missed Alex terribly, and he still loved him. At the same time, he was angry and frustrated that Alex had forced him to do what he had done. Nathan could read the emotions on his grandfather's face, and his jealousy bubbled up inside him. "Grandfather!" he cried in desperation. "Alex betrayed us! He's not one of us anymore, and we can't rely on him for anything. It's a stupid fantasy. We only have one choice." Lincoln gave no reaction to his grandson's outburst. Instead, he walked slowly over to his chair, sat pensively for a few moments, and gestured for them to leave him. Everyone rose from their chairs and walked silently out of the room. The meeting was over, and nothing had been decided. They had no option but to wait for Lincoln's decision. While they waited, the downfall of the family was drawing closer and closer. At the same time as his family was having their meeting, Alex was inspecting the grounds of Oak Ridge High School with Debbie. Oak Ridge had been completely restored, and the previous principal had turned over his office and his car to Alex. He was now the principal of the school, as well as the main teacher for Class 6, and everyone looked at him with respect. The current principal was still on hand to help with the day-to-day affairs, but Alex held the real power. When they had finished inspecting the school, they returned to his office. Debbie stood in the doorway, and Alex walked over to his desk and sat down in his chair. They smiled at each other, and then Alex turned his attention to the documents on his desk. His assistant had brought in the mail, and the newspaper lay at the top of the pile. The headline on the front page caught his eye, and he was stunned. It read, "Ambrose Company in turmoil. Aid and Ambrose under investigation." Alex froze. The mention of his family's name on the front page of the newspaper was the last thing he ever expected, and it struck him like a thunderbolt. It was a clear sign that the family was in worse trouble than they had ever been before. He kept his eyes fixed on the newspaper as he took his phone out of his pocket. When he turned it on and shifted his gaze from the newspaper to its screen, he grew even more worried. He had several missed calls from his family. Justin had called him several times, as had his mother and father. If they're calling me like this, he thought, they must be in worse trouble than even the newspaper could say. His hands started shaking from his frustration with himself. After all the recent drama, he had kept his phone off to get some quiet. He had never thought that things would unravel so quickly. He knew that this all had to be the work of the Mitchells, but he had never expected them to act so boldly. He looked back down at his phone. The names of Justin and his parents on the screen shone like a fire in his eyes. For them to call him would be a direct violation of his grandfather's wishes, and they had done it anyway. Whatever their situation, they must truly have been desperate. He tried to calm himself and look clearly at the situation. Wesley must be a part of it, he realized. He's in the best position to undermine the company, and it said that he's loyal to Nathan. He could have worked from within for years, weakening the company in small but important ways. He could make it look like everything was fine, while slowly turning the company into a house of cards. He shook his head at the thought of Nathan. As much as his grandfather was the force that kept the family together, Nathan was the force that was tearing them apart. And in the middle was Aiden, whose rise or fall would determine which force would prevail. "What's the matter, Alex?" Debbie asked him as she stepped forward to read the newspaper headline. "Is your family in trouble?" Her voice snapped Alex out of the whirlwind of his thoughts. He looked up at her. He had almost forgotten that she was there. "Yes," he answered. And then he sighed audibly. "It's my fault. I knew that the Mitchells were making moves against us, but I thought that they were only trying to cut into our market share. I had no idea they were trying to bring us down completely, but they are. And they must have powerful allies to help them." Alex frowned. His family had treated him unfairly, but they were still his family. He had to find a way to help them. Debbie could see the inner turmoil written on his face, and it affected her deeply. Even though Alex's family didn't approve of their relationship, she held no animosity toward them. Besides, if she could find a way to help them, maybe they would see her differently. "Don't worry, Alex," she said. "We'll sort it out. I could call my grandfather and ask for his advice." Alex looked at her. He loved her for trying to help, but he knew that her family wouldn't be able to tip the scales in a war between the Ambroses and the Mitchells. They would only be putting themselves in the crosshairs. He shook his head. "No, we shouldn't bother Jessup with this," he told her. "There's nothing your family can do about it." He needed time to think. He decided to walk home by himself. As he walked out the entrance to the school, he took out his phone and brought up his father's number. A short while later, Lincoln called the family back for a second round of discussions. While he had been pondering their situation, he had summoned Gideon and given him a short list of instructions. As the rest of the family took their seats, Gideon stood and got ready to present his progress to his father. "Dad, I've begun to take actions according to your orders," he said. "We'll be able to pay off our outstanding tax debts, and all our most substantial bank loans have also been paid. Furthermore, we've started negotiations with our business partners, and we're confident that the vast majority of these relationships will be restored. I believe that we'll be back to business as usual in about 2 days' time." Lincoln smiled approvingly. Gideon had rewarded him for his faith in him, and he had performed excellently. The entire family was in a lighter mood. The Ambrose name still counted for something, despite the best efforts of the Mitchells. Gideon, emboldened by the joyous look on his father's face, decided that the time was right to break another piece of news. "There's more," he said with a slight tremble in his voice. "I've had a phone call from Alex. He's coming to Fairview Island as we speak."